Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bad Luck Gamer, and today the title is no lie, no exaggeration. The Cosmere RPG, in my opinion, fixes 5 of probably the most common things we see in TTRPGs today. Now, am I saying the game is perfect? No. Are you guys tired of hearing me talk about this game at this point? Probably. The game is coming out this summer, and I just want to get as many people on board with it as possible because I legitimately think the Cosmere RPG has a lot to offer. And I'm going to prove it to you. But before we do, hey, if you like the channel and you like my shirt, why don't you guys check out Into the AM? The link in the description will get you 10% discounted off of all their clothes on their site. And they got a really killer deal where you can get 3 shirts for just under $20 each, which is a really cool deal. So you just go, there's a 3 shirt deal and you use my discount code. It's like $62, but with my 10% off, in addition to the other discounts, you're going to be paying less than $20 per shirt, which I think is a really good deal. And honestly, I've absolutely been loving my Into the AM shirts. I've had these shirts for 6 months now. At this point, they haven't shrunken the watch. The graphics still look good. They're not peeling or anything like that. And hey, I even fixed my green screen. So now this Viking Thor dude is not showing through my body, which is a plus. So if you are interested or you just want to help support the channel and you're looking for a graphic tee, check out the discount code down in the description. But let's go ahead and get on with these 5 points. So first, skill checks. Skill checks or skill tests in the Cosmere are one of the parts of tabletop that are the most finicky. Because when do you need a skill check? When is a skill check bad? There's so many different parts of skill checks that are really good because they give choice to players. I really don't like games that just kind of remove skill checks and you just roll base stats against certain types of checks because it doesn't give the player a sense that their build really matters. All it does is it's just a mode of adding random chance to the game. But I like it when my games give my choices actual weight. And the Cosmere RPG goes a step further with skill expertises. Skill expertises are kind of in 3 different categories. There's weapon expertises, which are really cool because each weapon in the game currently has a trait or 2. And if you have expertise in that weapon, it unlocks a new trait, so allowing your weapon to do something else, like using a 2-handed sword in one hand. The long sword gains the one-hand trait when you get the expertise in it, which is really cool. And it gives a lot more options on how you want to use the weapon, predominantly probably using a shield with it, which is really good because you get all the benefits of its damage and strength along with the fact that you get to use a shield. So it's really cool. They also have armor expertises. And in fact, some armors in the game like shard plate cannot be used unless you have the expertise for it. Shardplate is essentially like power armor, so it's really cool that your character can kind of spec into it. And like weapons, they also have additional traits that you can unlock by having an expertise in it. These are both really cool, but when we're relating this to skill checks, the utility and cultural expertises are where it's really at. Because with these expertises, you can just do the thing. You don't have to worry about rolling a check as long as what you're doing is generally basic within the thing you're trying to do. If you have a cultural expertise, for instance, not only can you speak the language and write the language, but you also know the basics of that culture. You know what the people are generally like. You know some of their cultural touchstones or their holidays, celebrations, all that kind of stuff. You just know this and you don't need to roll to figure it out. You don't need to make a lore check in order to do so. And with utility expertises, it goes a step further because you designate a thing, a particular skill set or knowledge set that your character knows, and you know the basics of that without needing to make any checks. And for things that are more specific or are more difficult to know, like the intricacies of working fabrials, for instance, then you get to make a check while other characters might not be able to. The best way I can kind of relate this to games like Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder is Arcana. The Arcana skill check, it pretty much lets you know anything about magic if you roll well enough, which makes your character's knowledge on a thing particularly spotty, because if you get several rolls about a particular subject in a row, your miss or hit chances are not super good, and so your character might really know something about a particular type of magic and then not know something else that they probably should know. And in the Cosmere RPG, how specific your knowledge is determines overall how effective the skill expertise is. For instance, if you have knowledge of religions or religion expertise, then you know the basics of all common religions on whatever world that you're currently playing the game in. And that's pretty good. But there might be less known religions that you can make a roll for. But if you say have a very specific, we'll say shamanism, for instance, as your utility skill, then what happens is you get to know the basics of that lesser known religion, though you don't get to know the basics of a lot of the other ones, or at least not for free. And you get to roll on much more secretive things. You might know particular rituals that are only known to certain people within that religion, which is really cool. So what I really like about skill expertise is not only do they eliminate a lot of unnecessary rolls, but it allows you to just know things and have a character who is actually proficient in a thing, effectively proficient, mechanically proficient. Your character is proficient and has like vehicle expertise, for instance. You could drive pretty much most vehicles. If it's a very underused vehicle or a very like a Formula One racer, sure, you might have to make a roll for it, but that roll will probably be at a much smaller difficulty than everyone else. And it's stuff like this that I think really makes it where your character not only can be specialized in particular fields, but also can just actually work that way in game without relying on random chance to determine what your character does or doesn't know. Sure, the difficult things are you're still gonna have to roll for, but for the basics, I mean, if you had like a expertise in warcasting, for instance, you know all spells that warcasters would know, or at least you know of them and how they work. That, I think, makes it very worthwhile for the Cosmere to have its expertise system, and it's something that I wish more games had. Next, let's go ahead and talk about improv. Improv is probably one of the most difficult skills to develop in tabletop. It's something that just only really comes with time and how comfortable you are with your character and with speaking out loud, getting in character, all this kind of stuff. It is a point that most games don't really have a lot to aid in. Sure, improv with like tables for GMs are really nice, but the players really don't get a lot of improv aids. Well, the Cosmere RPG is really well designed for slowly educating your players by forcing them to use improv, but in very small controlled ways, predominantly with the plot die. So the plot die, you've probably heard of me talk about in a few other videos. It's a really, really great mechanic that is, well, not necessarily new. It is new in the sense of how it's well designed. Like the complication. So there's two sides of the 6-sided die that make it where something negative happens as a result of your check. But they come with either a +2 or +4 modifier to your check. So you're more than likely to make the check, but there's some negative consequence. This is just a gamified version of yes and, because what happens is, yes, you do the thing and something else happens. This is something that makes tabletop so much more interesting and dynamic in so many ways. It makes it where your characters can do the thing, but some new complication comes up, some new dynamic, or maybe you're just trying to push the game forward. You don't want to spend time having some extra improv. Well, they have a system for this too. All you have to do is just add a focus or take away a focus for a complication to the player. So their character had to focus extra hard on this task to get it done. So they lose a focus, which is kind of like a stamina point. I'm not going to get into it here, but it's something where you can easily just have a good answer to move on without having to add too much more. But when you have those situations where a complication can be really fun or interesting, then this amplifies how the game works because now it's dynamic. Now the players are reacting to things as they're changing and not just the storyline the GM has set out. And of course, on the other side of the opportunity die is the opportunities. Now, the plot die, rather, not the opportunity die. I call it the opportunity die because that's what I'm hoping for. The opportunities are really interesting because something positive happens to the players. Similarly to complications, it can just be something like your character regains focus. You get into a flow state, as it was, and you kind of just let go of any stress, allowing your character to kind of regain some of that focus. But also other really great things can happen. Reinforcements can come in. There are many different ways that this die really makes the game more interesting. It'll make the GM have to think on their feet more, which is more entertaining for the GMs. And it gives the players more reasons to interact with the story itself, adding things or losing things as needed, which just makes the stories more dynamic. And in addition to this, if you're off put by the idea of the plot die, having to come up with things during your game, well, Brotherwise Games is coming out with a set of cards. Each card has either a complication or opportunity associated with it, and each of those cards have 3 different options for each mode of play. So if you're in an endeavor, which is kind of like exploration mode, or a social situation, or combat, there's an answer on each of these cards. There are 26 opportunity cards and 26 complication cards, meaning there's 152 different scenarios that are just completely random, designed for certain kinds of feels or themes that you can use as either aids for your game or a nice random deck if you're into that kind of thing. I know with all the Nat 20, Nat 1 random decks out there that a lot of people are interested in this kind of thing, and I really like the plot deck. It really adds a lot to the Cosmere RPG as a player aid and GM aid, but the plot die in general just makes the game more dynamic, more interesting, something that is actually alive and evolving with the players, and not just you pass, you fail, or the GM has to make a thing up because they just liked what the player did. You could still do that, true, but the plot die just kind of gamifies it in a way that makes it more accessible to more people. And talking about dynamics, let's talk about combat. The plot die plays so heavily in combat because it can change up how combat flows. And in addition to this, the Cosmere RPG rewards good roleplay in combat. This is something I've always wanted. I wanted a game where the way I tell the story actually impacts what is happening, where I could set things up, I can have plans, and that is reflected. How, you might ask? Well, beyond the plot die, which can add, some opportunities the players can take advantage of, how you gain advantage in the game, which is a action you can take, is based on the narrative. So your character describes how you're using one of your different skills against the enemy to gain an advantage. This makes it where your next test or attack against the enemy gains advantage, allowing you to roll twice and take the better result. An action you're going to take a lot, and because you have to describe what you're doing, this is really great for developing your player's ability to paint the scene, make it more interesting, or for the GM to offer plenty of opportunities for the player to paint up the scene to make it feel like their battle is truly unique, truly interesting. And even more than this, because you're painting the scene, because you're adding things, talking about how your character is interacting with the environment, opportunities and complications become that much more interesting. For instance, you might say, oh, well, I'm going to shove this person into a chair, knocking them off balance for my attack. All right, cool. That is going to be an athletics check versus their physical defense. You do so. The GM's like, all right, so on your attack, go ahead and raise the stakes. You roll a plot die. On a complication, you might slash the enemy, probably hitting them, but your sword will get lodged into the chair itself, which then needs to be dislodged for an additional action. Or as an opportunity, your slash knocks them into the chair, and then the chair falls over, knocking them prone in addition to your attack. The enemy being prone is a really great advantage for your team, and thus the way you told the story created a situation that allowed you to gain an opportunity. It's something that is really dynamic. It's really, really cool. And more importantly than any of this, it rewards good role playing. Do you want your skill to be reflected in how you play the game? Do you want to play in a TTRPG where you're not doing the same things over and over because they're just the meta build? The thing you're doing is just the thing that does the most damage in the game? Well, the Cosmere RPG solves this by making every combat dynamic, where your storytelling and the ability to use the scene is going to matter more than your build. So every battle is going to be unique and fun and interesting. And that's just something that tabletop needs, because honestly, I love Pathfinder 2nd Edition, but there are just some ways of playing the game that are just purely statistically better and makes your characters more powerful and feels better to do. And doing a bunch of hokey role-playing this can be fun, but is very reliant on your GM to really make it work. And that doesn't always have a payoff, but it does always have a payoff in the Cosmere. And another thing added on to combat as well, attack of opportunity, or reactive strike as it's called in the Cosmere, something they probably took from Pathfinder 2nd Edition, is here, but it is much less intrusive than it is in D&D. In D&D, it has a very flytrap style of combat where your character moves adjacent to an enemy, or an enemy moves adjacent to your character, and now you're both stuck, because the second one of you leaves the attack range of the other will get a free attack on you with one of their reactions. This makes it where it's super not good for a player to move in these scenarios without either giving up their actions with disengage, or even giving up a bonus action with disengage for the few classes or abilities that allow you to do so, making those classes honestly a very necessary multi-class if you don't want to play a character who does really well in face-to-face kind of scenarios. In the Cosmere RPG, everyone does have attack of opportunity, which is not like Pathfinder, where in Pathfinder only certain kinds of characters have access to attack of opportunity. But in the Cosmere, you have to spend focus in order to use your attack of opportunity. This is an important resource because it is tied to many of the strong actions in the game. One like the Graze mechanic, which allows you to, if you miss an enemy with an attack, you still do your damage die, you just don't add your strength modifier to, or your skill modifier to it. So it makes it a choice whether a character uses the attack of opportunity, taking that focus and possibly depriving themselves of a better action later, or using it for the sake of getting some extra damage off on an enemy. This makes attack of opportunity much more strategic, much more designed with intent, and more importantly than that, it makes it where moving out of combat is not a bad idea. In fact, if you're confident in your character's defense, or even just your ability to take the hit, you're actively depriving your enemy of a resource if they choose to take the strike, which is really good. It adds new layers to attack of opportunity. And attack of opportunity, honestly, is a system I don't particularly like, but if it doesn't exist, it allows enemies that you're trying to pin down to just wiggle away from you. So it needs to exist in some degrees, but in games like Pathfinder, you need to take certain feats or play certain classes to get it. And in D&D, it's so prevalent that it removes movement as a general option. So the Cosmere has found a really good middle ground that I think it hits perfectly what attack of opportunity needs to be. Something that is an opportunity for an opponent if they're willing to make a cost. And that is what I think is a good way of balancing it. The final thing I want to talk about is narrative rewards. Narrative rewards are huge for TTRPGs in general. It doesn't matter what game you play, because the thing is, great GMs are already doing this, but they don't have support for it. The games aren't designed for it. And many games like Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you're either getting something that you already kind of have access to, or you're getting something that potentially breaks the balance of the game, which doesn't feel fun. Narrative rewards, though, in the Cosmere RPG are so good because they are something that rewards your characters out of game or out of combat based roleplay, their goals, their motivations. Your character has something they want to do. And when they do that thing, they're going to get a reward at the end of it. And this reward can be many things. There are permanent wounds in the Cosmere RPG where your character could potentially lose an eye. And with the narrative rewards, your character could learn to work with that, essentially removing the penalties for having lost that eye. It's not something you can do right away, but you can narratively work around your character's weaknesses until they're no longer a weakness. Or, in a much more gamey and honestly more satisfying way, there are certain things in the game you cannot get by just leveling. You must get them through narrative rewards. Some companions that you can get, like the Larkin or the Rashadium, the Larkin being essentially like a insect dragon creature with the power to eat magic, isn't a companion you can pick up through the reward system. Similarly, the Rashadium is an ultra powerful warhorse that is almost as intelligent as a person and might have some more shenanigans in their lore, something that we're not going to learn until the game comes out, which I'm super excited for. And this is only just a small part of it. This is something that makes role-playing, makes your character's actual motivations, what they want, makes it where you're not just playing the GM's story. You're telling your own story. Your character wants their own things, not just what the GM tells you want. And for GMs, this is absolutely amazing because now we finally have a system for something we've always been doing, rewarding players for amazing storytelling. Now we have a system we can lean on if we're just unsure what to give the players or how we want to structure it, how we want them to get to that goal. There's so much good stuff with the narrative rewards. And honestly, we don't even know everything that's going into this system yet. I know just the basics, but from just the basics, I know this is going to be incredible and game-changing for TTRPGs in general. And yeah, that's 5 ways that the Cosmere RPG is honestly pushing the envelope, moving tabletop forward, and making it much more narratively focused with some good mechanics to back up that narrative. Now, of course, this list might not have been for you. The Cosmere RPG might not have been for you. That's completely understandable. But if you did like this video, I'm going to be covering the Cosmere a lot more in the future. So leave a like and subscribe to the channel. But if you didn't like the Cosmere content, well, there's a lot more I'm going to be covering in general, not just the Cosmere RPG. And as well, if you like TTRPGs, even if the Cosmere isn't your thing, we really need to get the algorithm working for that. So any kind of TTRPG content that you come across, not even just mine, but anyone else's that you enjoy, leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe to those channels. We're in a really great year for TTRPGs. And I want to the best of my ability, help TTRPGs claim what they've always been destined for, which is more people, more interest, and to be not as niche of a hobby. It's already been pushed pretty far. It's been expanded to a degree that no one would have thought possible in the 90s. And now we're in an era where a lot of people just like tabletop or are interested in it. So everything we do for the algorithm helps. Even if it's not on my content, I want more people working on tabletop content. Anyway, that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me. And I'll see y'all next time. Bye.